I the Mask from In Flames. So what's the Mask? Is the Mask actually the 1990s In Flames, the Gothenburg melodic death metal legends? Is it the 2000s band that saw their popularity and their fan base numbers spike, but also saw cracks and division start among the ranks of their most faithful? Or is this the new band that is now taking off the mask to reveal their true self? Is this something that's more metaphoric? Does it have no meaning at all? Are we examining an album title way too much? Yeah, we probably are. Let's talk about the music, though. This is the brand new disc, the first in 3 years. It doesn't feel like it's been that long since we've talked about an In Flames album, but apparently it is. And over the course of these past couple of years, there have been some changes here and there whenever it comes to the band's lineup, but also there has been some changes with Anders himself, who has been improving his vocals really on a constant. He wanted to have a little bit more range, and this is something where on I the Mask, I'll spoil it right away, he does make some strides on. This is actually one of the positives that this album does possess right out of the gate before we even start speaking about the tracks itself. But whenever the initial singles started to drop, there was a lot of excitement for this album anyhow, considering it felt like the band was finding a nice happy medium between the melodic death metal band that they were in the old days, back whenever I was but a small sprat, and the alternative metal group that they now currently are. And if you remember us talking 3 years ago about their previous album, about accepting who In Flames currently are, well, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I know it's still really hard for people to accept because they can't believe it's true. But this is who the band is. Now, for purposes that will become evident later on, I'm only going to talk about the first 12 tracks on this album. The deluxe edition bonus I'm not going to worry about in this regard for a reason that actually kind of helps the band out a little bit because, well, we'll talk about it whenever that comes up. But the first 5 cuts off of this album are actually pretty solid. I like the fact that they're able to sort of give this little balancing tight wire act between these two sides that they had, their past and their present, and really deliver something that felt like it had a little bit more of an oomph behind it. And I think maybe the strength of Anders' vocals helps that out a little bit, because both Voices and I the Mask are able to show sort of the gruff side of this band, but also leave a little bit of openness for the band to really produce something that has a little bit more value, a little bit more dynamisty to it. And whenever we get to Call My Name, the third cut off of this disc, we start to hear the higher register that Anders now has with all of those vocal lessons. And as a result, this song actually becomes really awesome. And I like the fact that it's able to sort of juxtapose 2000s era In Flames. I know that some folks, some of the true warriors might say, oh, those high vocals, those are emo vocals. They're not. They're not. It's just something that is actually able to give this song a little bit more of a dynamic range. Just because it sounds like the high vocals in a Screamo song that you heard 10 years ago doesn't mean that In Flames has gone Screamo. They've instead been able to utilize this idea and utilize this concept. Anders has been able to better his voice in order to give his vocals a little bit more of, like I said, dynamic range. And that is helpful, considering one thing that In Flames songs felt like they were lacking on some of the previous albums was a lot of motion. And it was just so wild to all of us because it felt like there was enough motion and kinesis on some of their earlier works that they didn't need to utilize a massive range vocally in order to get the point across. But this is a brand new era. This is a brand new style of writing. And really, in many ways, I feel like this is an album where it was an initial test drive for that, and they did make a couple of mistakes. For example, I Am Above and Follow Me are both decent enough, but by Follow Me, it's starting to feel a little bit generic. And one of the biggest problems that I've seen on this album throughout my listens is the fact that they do enjoy taking the chorus up a key or whatever it may be and finishing off the track that way. That is the grand finale. Whoa, Anders has this brand new range. Let's show this range on every track by repeating the chorus and, taking up the guitars, taking up the music, taking up his voice, and then, there we go, song over, simple, right? No. It's very lazy, not to mention it's something that they utilize far too often on this album. It's like they sort of forgot how to close out a song. Maybe give it a nice powerful conclusion that was going to give it a lot more of a lasting effect or lasting power. And that's the one thing that this album feels like it doesn't really have a lot of. It doesn't have a lot of lasting power or a lasting feeling. Instead, you just kind of see and nitpick these small little items that occur scattered among all of the songs, and that's what really actually stays with you, as opposed to some of the more positive things that the music is able to accomplish. Next up, we have This Is Our House. Who the hell do they think they are? Paige from the WWE? Well, okay, she's retired, so maybe they're taking over for her or something. This song just feels really weird and kind of awkward. It's supposed to be one of those live songs where you're able to get the audience more so involved, but the kinesis on this track is definitely fair for that respect, but whenever it comes to a studio setting, it doesn't really hit the same way and feels kind of unnatural. It's not one that necessarily gets your blood pumping or boiling. It's not necessarily one that makes you feel really powerful, and that's of course the intended effect of this track. Going into We Will Remember, that's one of the bigger problems. I don't really remember much about this song. It feels like it's just there, and once again, it showcases and utilizes some of these minor little issues whenever it comes to writing. At times, the writing on this disc definitely feels like the band has turned a corner. They are able to use some encouraging solos, but at times they do feel a little bit lazy. Sometimes the solo simply follows the vocal line. Sometimes the solo does its own thing and feels very free, feels like truly a unique part of the album. And really, whenever you have such a sort of mishmash of different ideas that are coming together, some feeling like they are a little more energetic or a little bit more kinetic than others, then the overall feeling or timbre of the album can get really distant and can also feel very, very jilted. That's what this album starts to feel like very early on in its second half, and it does continue. That's the sad part about this. Even the first 5 tracks are not necessarily exempt from the idea of feeling a bit jilted. It just feels like they handle or disguise that a little bit better with some better songwriting. Going into In This Life, again, we have a pretty decent sounding idea that just does not seem to follow through completely. I like the fact that this almost feels like a 90s alternative song or a 90s alt metal song if it was around back then. It has sort of the similar feel and similar makeup of some of the tracks that I remember from back in those days, like if Bush went a little bit heavier or whatever it may be. It's a really nice little idea, but it's one that feels ruined by the fact that it's not closed out with a very powerful ending. Instead, it just feels like it lingers and lingers. And Burn, being another positive potential effect, is one that is left just feeling like it's an over-aggressive melody that is not totally utilized to its perfect extent. And then we get into these last 3 tracks. We get into Deep Inside, All the Pain, and Stay With Me. And these feel deeply personal, as though they were written as a trilogy around the same time, and there was an event or something that spawned or spurned this on, that caused these to come into Genesis. And Deep Inside is actually pretty well constructed, as is All of the Pain. All of the Pain, though, suffers from lyricism that just feels like it's a bit lazy, almost as though halfway through, Anders or whomever penned this track felt written into a corner and wasn't too sure exactly how to give this track the necessary power. The only other excuse could potentially be that it's so honest that that's the reason why it's simplistic. They're not really going for anything poetic. They're not going for a song that's meant to have a message that can be examined by poetry students in a first-year college course. Instead, they just want to do something real nice and direct. But as a result, it feels like the track itself, the excellent backbone, feels a bit wasted. It feels like it could have been utilized for something else and utilized a little bit better. And that's just a feeling, I understand, that maybe doesn't exactly seem very subjective, it seems more objective. But listen to this again and take into account what would happen if the lyrics perhaps had a little bit more, they didn't feel as paint by number. They didn't feel as much like they were using some of the basic ideas. Imagine if the lyrics felt as personal as the overall body of these songs did, these last 3. Deep Inside was ruined by the fact that they once again took it up right there to end the song. Again, this band just forget how to close out songs with power. This is not it, especially not whenever the same trick is utilized over and over again. But Stay With Me is a unique specimen. This is one that almost could come down to being a bit of a ballad. It's one that certainly is meant to have a lot more power, a lot more reflection. There's supposed to be a message that's behind this that is hopefully going to get through. The problem is that we hear the same lyrics to this over and over again. The last 2.5 minutes of this song is just a little minor deviation here and there of the overall chorus message. And of course, at the end, we get it in a more traditional death metal scream, something that we've heard from In Flames for years, as opposed to the clean voice that we'd heard for the previous minute and a half. So again, a song that had a lot of power, a song that obviously has a lot of meaning, is one that is kind of sullied by the fact that the overall songwriting, or at least in this case, the lyricism and the way in which that was all designed, was just sort of left alone. Nothing was done in order to give this latter portion any sort of oomph, power, or even individuality aside from the death metal scream. So again, this is an album that's not really, it's not plagued with ideas that are present throughout each and every song. The same mistakes aren't necessarily repeated twice or 3 times as a whole. Instead, there's these small little issues that are on every song. And that's something that's just as bad, if not worse. It basically tells me, and basically tells us, that I, The Mask, had the capability to be a pretty decent album. One that certainly would feel like In Flames was back in the saddle. That they were able to make the necessary tweaks required in order to make this a little bit more of a bearable transition for those that perhaps were on the outside trying desperately to find something about alt metal In Flames that they could grasp onto. I felt like this album could have a lot of things for those types of people, but it just fell a little bit short. Another explanation I could come up with is that with this new dynamic vocal range, the band just simply wasn't too sure what to do with it. And so some of these compositions felt either lackluster, or Anders himself, or whoever wrote the lyrics, was unable to really write based around what perhaps they were feeling. There's a lot of different explanations that could possibly be out there, but there's also the highest case that none of them are true, and this was as designed. This was as intended. It's amazing to think, but it's very true and very possible. Either way, I do leave Not Alone off this because I still feel that Stay With Me, despite its problems, is the better ender whenever it comes to these 2 tracks. It's the one that actually leaves you with something different. It's the one that leaves you with something special. And as a result, I think it actually helps the score despite the fact of its problems. It's one where prior to this is an album that would easily saddle itself around a 15. Right around that average barrier. Nothing special, but not necessarily horrible. But with Stay With Me, I would actually bump it up to about a 15.5, so let's just call it an even 16. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Because I think In Flames does have something going here, but it just doesn't seem like it ever came fully together. And that's a problem. We need an album from this band where everything comes together. And it feels like that they're trying. It feels like that they are no longer just going to be a band that repeats some of the same old tired and true ideas over and over again. It does feel like they want to try some new things, but it just hasn't all come together yet. And maybe the next album is it. Maybe it won't be. Maybe it'll be just the same as all of the previous that we've heard over the past couple of years. But for now, I'm going to stick with a 16 for I, The Mask by In Flames. But I want to know your thoughts. What's your score out of 30? Let me know in the comments below. My name is coverkillernation, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Take care.